I will start this lesson by saying that this is a requested lesson. Don requested this lesson, and it's really going to take a bit more than maybe one lesson. But the question is why I'm a Christian. Don and some of you, most of you, I dare say, don't know why I'm a Christian. Now, I could be like Rick and just have the last name. But being a Christian is more than just being someone with the last name of Christian, right, Rick? Being a Christian is being a child of God. I was not raised in the church. My parents were of two very different denominations. And so to become a child of God was not necessarily an easy path for me to choose. So I guess in that, the reason that I'm a Christian is a unique perspective. I'm going to try to follow the PowerPoint, but this is a very personal lesson. It's a very personal story. The real reason why I'm a Christian today, the Apostle Paul summed it up in the book of Romans, chapter 1. And in Romans chapter 1, I would like for you to read with me what Paul wrote in verse 19 and 20. Now, before I became a Christian, I really gave this passage little consideration. But as I was thinking about this lesson this week, I realized that it really does truly sum up why I chose to follow Jesus. In Romans chapter 1 and in verse 19, the Apostle Paul says this, "For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them." Okay, in other words, what Paul is saying is, we know about God. It's very clear what we know about God. Look at what he says in verse 20. For his invisible attributes. Okay, so the invisible things of God, what is not clearly seen about God, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. What Paul is saying is, throughout the history of the world, and this has been true, throughout the history of the world, mankind has been able to see evidence of a creator. Every civilization the world has ever known that has existed since the beginning of the world has realized and recognized the evidence for a creator. There is no possibility, and this is where my mind went at a very early age. Both of my parents believed in God, and they taught me about God. For that I am thankful. But I realized from a very early age, I'm not necessarily the most intelligent person, but I realized from a very early age that this world and all that we know is not an accident. It cannot possibly be an accident. So that's where I was from probably the time I began to learn to read. I realized that there was a system in the world. There are many systems, in fact, that work as a system. And with every system, there is a design. And with every design, there is a designer. With every pattern, there's an architect. And so to me, it's evident that the world has a creator. And that's essentially what Paul is saying. When we went out west when I was very young, my dad's brother lives in Utah. One of the places we visited, among many others, was the East Desert in eastern Utah. One of the #1 places for finding fossils. You know, I love rocks. I love fossils. I don't remember how old I was. I was probably maybe 10 years old, maybe 9. So 9 or 10 years old, and I'm in the East Desert, and we're hunting for dinosaur bones, Dylan. It was a lot of fun, okay? Now, I've got dinosaur bones at home, and I took one to a geologist and to find out what it was. And Dr. Stone was his name, of all things. And Dr. Stone at Marietta College, who's passed away now, looked at it and he said, "Well, do you know what you have here?" I said, "No, that's why I'm asking." And he said, "You have the fingernail of a Tyrannosaurus Rex." Okay, so at home, we have a fingernail somewhere. It's buried in years of debris and collections. But somewhere at home, my mother still has the fingernail of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, there was an observation that I made at the age of about 10. As we were in the East Desert of Utah picking up dinosaur bones, I realized that most of the bones of those great dinosaurs were on high places, or they were mixed in with flood debris. Most of the dinosaur bones that we have today that have survived as fossils can be found in flood debris. Now, in my 10-year-old mind, 9 or 10-year-old mind, I realized that this was evidence of what we call Noah's flood. Maybe that's accurate, maybe it's not. But in my mind, it was verification for what the Bible taught. Outside of that, I've looked at other religions. I've looked at and briefly studied some very strange religions in my life, in my quest. Because while I could see that the world was created and had a design, that does not mean that Christianity is the only religion. It does not mean that Christianity is right and Islam is wrong. And so I did, during my teenage years, in my quest for seeking truth, I briefly studied, and I didn't spend a lot of time on Buddhism or Hinduism. Those are just crazy religions that made absolutely no sense to me. Okay? And I could not wrap my mind around the beginning of those religions. Islam, the Muslim faith, had a little bit more, if you will, substance to it. But a brief look at the history of Islam and a brief look at the doctrines of Islam pretty soon convinced me that it also was a false religion. And these religions existed in order to hold together the fabrics of certain societies.